Hi everyone, this is Reverend Josh at Boise First United Church of Christ. We're so glad you've chosen to listen to our sermon this morning. We hope that you find yourself encouraged as we meet you wherever you are on life's journey. We are in the second week of a series where we're talking about misquoting Jesus, reclaiming what Jesus likely meant. And I say likely, remind you again, because we don't always know exactly what Jesus meant. I don't want to just become fundamentalist on the other side of my own interpretation. But perhaps what Jesus may have meant in a phrase that sometimes maybe is misinterpreted. So I want to start with one word. That's the word talent. Talent. Think about it for a moment. In many ways, we think of that word as like, wow, that person is so talented. They're such a great musician, or like Skylar and Ashley. They have such beautiful voices. What a talent, right? We picture something that maybe someone is born with, a gift or a natural ability. But here's the strange part. The meaning of that word talent as ability, it didn't exist until centuries after the parable that I'm about to tell you was first told. Before, the word talent was actually just considered a unit of weight. A talent was a weight in Greece and Rome and in the Middle East, and throughout Scripture, when they say the word talent, they're referring to a form of measurement for metal or gold or silver. Now talent was like, if you had a talent, it meant that you were like really, really wealthy. It was at the highest tier of income, and so maybe one might say is like the highest form of bill that we have, which is what, $500, right? And so is that the biggest bill we have, I think? Am I right on that? Am I wrong? $1? 100? Isn't there a $500 bill? There is. It's out there. I've seen it. I had it as a child. I remember. So I'm glad that you have so much joy in you today. So a talent was the largest form of bill or currency at the time. So if you had a talent, you had a lot of money, and very few people had that much money. It was not a gift, it was not a skill, it was really more or less a pile of money. So how did a unit of currency turn into this word of innate ability instead? Well, for centuries, preachers told this story that you're about to hear today as one of ambition, of maximizing your potential, of doubling your profits. It was in many ways co-opted by the idea of capitalism. And I think in many ways, centuries of retelling this story quietly swapped out the word of what Jesus actually meant to fit more comfortably in our capitalistic mindset. So what's the story? Well, let's read it here in Matthew chapter 25. Beginning in verse 4. For it is if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, and to another 2, and to another 1, and to each according to his ability. Then he went away at once. The one who had received the 5 talents went off and traded with them and made 5 more talents. Verse 17, in the same way the one who had 2 talents made 2 more talents. Verse 18, but the one who had received 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and buried his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful, trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Verse 22, and the one who had 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over 2 talents to me, and I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Verse 24, then the one who had received 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter. Catch that. Wow. I mean, there's some boldness to say that, isn't there? I mean, we're talking about slavery, right? And we understand slavery in that time can play a different role than we understand slavery today. Sometimes slavery, I'll pause here for a moment to give you some context. Sometimes slavery during this time could have also been the paying off of a debt. So if you owed a debt to somebody, then you or your children or someone in your family might serve a certain amount of time to pay off that debt. And that also could also mean another way when certain people and certain people groups would conquer a land. If somebody was unwilling to bow the knee to the new empire, they would often be enslaved. And so it didn't always necessarily look how we understand it today with what happened in Europe and as well as here in the United States, where people went over and captured people and enslaved them in a different way. People were also freed every 7 years, as we know in the year of Jubilee. And so just kind of have that in your mind as we keep reading. Verse 25, "So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours." But his master replied, "You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was mine and with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away." So here's something that I want us to capture in this story. You've got these 3 individuals who have been given different measures of talents, right? You've got the one who's been given 10, they've multiplied it, given 5, they multiplied it by 10. The one that's been given 2 has multiplied it by 4, and then the other one multiplies it by nothing, right? And Jesus says the same thing to the first 2 who multiply it, doesn't he? Good and faithful servant. If this was like a parable that's supposed to teach you that I'm going to give you this and you're supposed to produce the biggest amount return that you can possible, then perhaps he wouldn't have said the same thing to the second person. He would have only praised the first, right? Because the first is the one that obviously was able to get the greatest return. But he doesn't. He says the same thing to both of the men. It's the last one that he says something very different. Not well done, but instead a chastisement in this story. The master isn't grading on a curve, though. He isn't ranking outcomes. I think actually faithfulness with 5 and faithfulness with 2 seems to have the identical blessing, because the measure was never the size of the pile. It was what you did with what you were actually given. This is not a small detail. The whole story hinges on this. There's a reason I think this happened. Socialist Max Weber, he traces this back during the Reformation about 500 years ago. He says that this parable started to get interpreted very differently in cultural contexts because there began to be this thing called the Protestant work ethic, where diligence and productivity and accumulation of wealth got read as signs of God's favor. That if you were conquering and you were multiplying and you had a lot to show for it, that meant that God's blessing was upon you. And this story was often rooted in that teaching in the Reformation. A bigger harvest, a bigger nest egg, a bigger congregation, a bigger house, the most expensive car or horse and buggy, proof you are one of the most faithful ones. But we're not immune to this today either. What's interesting, even in our religious and church traditions, we still measure success by the numbers. How full are the pews? How big is the budget? How much money maybe you gather, but also maybe even how much can you give away? How big is our house? How many zeros are behind your salary? Sermons have been preached in the church over and over again, even in the progressive mainline churches as well, that somehow the more you can produce, the bigger you are, the better you are. Look again at who Jesus actually singles out in this story, though. It's not the servant with the smallest result. It's the servant who was afraid of the master, and perhaps rightfully so. So sure, the whole enterprise is rigged against him. We know that. And he did nothing to multiply what he was being given. He buried it. He played it safe. There was no faithfulness possible because honestly, what I hear and see in the story is he's crippled by fear. We live in a world and a society where time and time again, we feel like, man, the odds are just stacked against us here. No matter how hard I work, it seems like I have less and the billionaires have more. No matter how hard I work, it seems like there's never enough. No matter how hard we strive to move equality and democracy forward in a way that provides equality for all, it feels like we're just constantly making 2 steps backward and 5 steps 2 steps forward and 5 steps backwards. And sometimes I think the fear, the anxiety cripples us from even just continuing to move forward, continuing to be faithful with what God has called us to do and to bring into the world the love that God has called us to bring in, because fear cripples us. Anxiety cripples us. We feel overwhelmed. It feels like the whole system is rigged against us, like so many people reap what they do not deserve, and yet we keep sowing and we don't seem to get that which we have worked so hard for. I think this story is very interesting because it reminds us of the imbalances of power that exist in our world, but also existed in that time in a deep and profound way. This isn't, I don't think, just a cautionary figure in the story. I think this is paralysis. It isn't a story of you didn't scale enough, you didn't multiply enough, you didn't produce enough, you didn't have a good Protestant work ethic. Instead, I think it's that you let fear talk you out of showing up with what you had. For fear of power, fear of empire, fear of culture and society that had disadvantaged him, and fear crippled him from doing anything with what he had been entrusted with. A story that rewarded pure scale that would have given the master blessings only to the servant. It gives unedited two very different sized outcomes, I think, in this story. So if faithfulness isn't just about scale, but it's about letting go of fear and stepping into stewarding that whatever it is that we've been given, I wonder today how we might think about this in Doug's life of 70 years of faithful ministry. We're not honoring you today because you wrote incredible books, or because you made all the headlines, or because you were the most notable minister out there and they always have you on CNN for interviews when it's anything religious. We're honoring you today because for decades you have just had a steady faithfulness to just keep showing up in a world that maybe didn't feel so faithful, that didn't feel so safe and so secure. And at times when maybe you felt fear or uncertainty about the world and your congregations you served needed you to show up and love them. There were sermons prepared in weeks that you didn't feel inspired. You know that's like, right? You got to be in the right headspace to write a good sermon. If my sermon's ever bad, you probably know because, wow, he had a rough day that day. Hospital rooms visited that nobody photographed. Meetings that you sat through that there will be no accounting for. Couples counseled and maybe marriages redirected with wisdom. Funerals where people were brought incredible comfort. Just showing up when people needed you. And for many of us in this room, Doug's faithfulness has looked something like just showing up for 16 years in a classroom on Mondays. They've gone through over 30 books in that class, that faith explorations class, working through theology and scripture, searching for questions. 30 books is not just like a headline, but it's a stack of well-worn paperbacks. I saw that stack of paperbacks when I was at your house. A room of people asking hard questions and a teacher willing to sit with them, to sit with the curiosity and the mystery without forcing people to think or believe anything, but just being faithful with the few talents that show up in your room each week. That is what this parable, I think, is actually about. It's about showing up time and time again to be faithful with what's been given to you, to not allow fear and anxiety or what's been stacked against you in society to cripple you. It's not always just the dramatic doubling or the decades of not burying it, but I think Doug didn't need to pastor the biggest church in Idaho or in the world, but we know you pastored big churches. We know that. Or write the book everyone quotes to be the embodiment of well done and good faithful servant. Because you could have pastored a small church like this and still heard those words, well done, good and faithful servant. Because you're the kind of person that shows up. And you keep showing up to hear those words for 70 years of your ordination. That's what this parable is about, I think. I think it's not measured by the size of the pile. I think it's measured by whether you keep tending to it. Most of us are not going to be entrusted with 5 talents, $500 or $100, whatever you all think, okay? Most of us are going to be entrusted with much less talents, income, resources. But most of our faithfulness isn't going to look quiet or small and go largely unnoticed, because I think actually it's those small things that make the difference. It's the closer to a phone call to a lonely neighbor than it is a news headline. Anytime I need help with something, my next door neighbor seems to just jump to his feet. When I first moved into our where we're at now in our home, we were literally out touring the new place, and he came out and he was like, "Hey, are you all looking at this place?" I'm like, "Yeah, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Josh," and got to know him, and found out that he and his wife are part of the LDS tradition. And prior to coming here, I'd only ever met LDS people on Broadway for Book of Mormon, and so. I was like, okay, I don't know where the tie is at. You don't have the tie on? Okay, you're in shorts. I didn't know what to do with it. And so I was a little suspicious of him at first. And I kind of kept him at a distance because I thought, well, I'm sure the only reason he's talking is because he's trying to convert me and get me to come to the church, And so I kept waiting on bated breath for him to try to ask, do you want to come to church with me some Sunday? And so one Sunday, I remember I just told him, I just said, I just want you to know, if you ever decide that you want to invite me to your church, I'm a pastor. I'm never free on Sundays. So, you're kind of wasting your time with me. And he's like, no, I'm not like that. I know we have that impression in the world, and that's not what this is like. And he's like, I genuinely want to be your neighbor. And I said, well, the guy who lives with me, it's not my roommate, right? He's my husband. And are you okay with that? And he's like, absolutely. We're friends with lesbians. I'm like, great, good. I won't be your first gaze. This is excellent. And over time, I found my prejudice. What did I talk about last week? Judge not. Yeah, I found that had to fall down, and I had to hear those words for myself. And I have found that he has loved me in simple faithfulness in a way that inspires me all the time. I told him I was trying to try riding a bike again, that I hadn't done so in a decade. And before I knew it, he was at my garage doors. You can borrow my bike for the season. I had an issue with my sprinkler, and I was saying lovely things in my backyard. And he just peeked over, and he just came right over with his tools, and he fixed it. I needed a cup of milk for a recipe, and I texted him, "Hey, are you home? Could I have a quick cup of milk?" And he was at my door with a cup of milk. My mower wouldn't start, and he could hear me out there, again, struggling. I was praying. What were you all thinking when I was saying? And there he was. Let me take a look. None of those are 10 talents. None of that's a ton of investment. It's just the simple faithfulness of showing up, of saying, I'm going to love my neighbor. I'm going to care for my neighbor. I'm going to be there when people need me and I come across them. I aspire to love my neighbors the way my neighbor loves me. The question in this parable actually just, I think, asks us, not did you go big, but did you show up? Did you bury what you were given out of fear that it wasn't enough for the world or for your daily bread or the neighbor next door? Did you give it? Did you bury it because the world was just too scary and too broken? Or did you just keep showing up because you knew that you had to? Somewhere in our lives, there is a talent. I don't know what it is for you today. Maybe, and it's probably not a flashy kind, just something that you've been entrusted with. Maybe a grandchild who calls you and you always pick up when they do. Maybe a friend going through something hard who you keep checking on long after everyone seems to have just moved on. Maybe it's a skill you have, fixing things or listening well or cooking or gardening, that you keep offering to people who need it with no audience watching. Many thanks to those of you who bring me baked goods on the daily. I appreciate your faithfulness. Maybe it's an aging parent or a marriage that asks the same patience day after day with no finish line in sight. Or maybe it's a class you show up to and you teach. Week after week, you prepare and you journey with people, Doug, and you love them well. Or maybe it's a seat on a committee or a shift at Interfaith Sanctuary that if you showed up, no one else would notice except for the people who depend on you. Maybe it's a habit of prayer, of noticing, and a spirit of gratitude that you keep tending even when life just seems to just keep dealing you the wrong cards. I don't know what the faithfulness, the simple daily faithfulness is for you, but this week I invite you, don't measure it against everyone else's 5 talents or 4 talents or 2 talents or how they doubled it. Measure it against the one you've been given and be faithful with it. Don't let fear talk you into burying it because it feels too small or the world feels too cruel. Just keep stewarding it, keep showing up with it, because it turns out the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant," they were never reserved for the ones who made the biggest piles. They were spoken in full over the ones who doubled 2 into 4, the same as the one who doubled 5 into 10. And they are spoken in a quieter way over you today, Doug, over 70 years. And the 30 books of one faithful servant right here among us, and the sermons and the love that you've extended. Well done, good and faithful servant. Well done. And may the words "well done" be spoken over each of us too in this room. Not for how much we accumulated, but for how faithfully we tended what we were given. Don't bury it. Be faithful with it. Show up each day. Look over that fence and love that neighbor. Amen? Amen. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Boise First UCC podcast. We hope you found inspiration, encouragement, and a deeper connection to your faith and community. If you enjoyed today's conversation, we encourage you to subscribe, to leave a review, or share with your friends and family so that they can more quickly find us. Also, if you benefited from today's podcast, we invite you to make a donation at boisefirstucc.org/donate. Until next time, may you go in peace with curiosity and courage and a heart full of hope as we look toward our progressive Christian faith.